Head Jens Stoltenberg speaking in Washington on what is being done to prevent an escalation in this conflict, given the new long-range rocket systems being sent by the US into the theatre of war. Antony Blinken said it is Russia attacking Ukraine. The best way to avoid escalation, he said, is for Russia to stop the war. He said he sees no sign of that now and said this could drag on for many months to come. He also said Ukraine has committed to not use these US-provided systems on targets inside Russian territory. To be clear, the US is actually not sending long-range munitions. On Finland and Sweden seeking NATO membership, Antony Blinken said the US strongly supports their application and wants to see them as NATO members as quickly as possible. Finland and Sweden, he said, are working directly with Turkey, who at present does not support their membership. And the NATO chief on that point said all 30 allies need to agree to accept Sweden and Finland as members. And he said he is ready to address Turkey's concerns, describing Ankara as an important ally. And in response to a question about fears of a nuclear escalation, Jens Stoltenberg said NATO and NATO allies are monitoring closely Russia's nuclear exercises. He said this nuclear saber rattling is dangerous and increasing tensions, but he said he has seen no changes in Russia's nuclear posture. Lots to get through here. CNN's Alex Marquardt is following today's developments in Washington. And we expected both to address the announcement of the provision of new long-range rocket systems to Ukraine by the US. And indeed, they did, and that's where some of the questions came in. What do we hear?
Well, Becky, I thought it was a very interesting, wide-ranging press conference from both men, neither of whom, frankly, are known for making too much news when they step up to these podiums. But they were asked about all sorts of things, all issues of the day, and perhaps most importantly, this announcement by the Biden administration that they will be sending a new package of weapons that will include these rockets that can reach around 80 kilometers in terms of their range. Becky, I thought it was very interesting that President Blinken was pushing this line that we're now hearing more and more from the Biden administration, that the U.S. is sending to Ukraine precisely what they need, and precisely what they need to have the strongest possible hand at a negotiating table, acknowledging that this war one day will end at the negotiating table. Becky, there's a big difference between what the U.S. believes Ukraine needs and what Ukraine believes Ukraine needs. So what we have now is, yes, the U.S. sending this advanced long-range rocket system called a HIMARS. It's a very mobile unit that is armored. It's on wheels. It can what they call shoot and scoot. So it fires off and then it moves very quickly. But they are not sending the rockets with the longest range capabilities. As I mentioned, the rockets that Ukraine will be getting have a range of around 50 miles or 80 kilometers, which will allow the Ukrainian forces to fire at Russian forces in the distance as they move westwards into the Donbass region. However, we heard from President Zelensky just yesterday saying that in order to recapture Ukrainian cities, in order to open those land routes open those sea routes through the Black Sea in order to get food out, they need rockets that have a range between 100 and 140 kilometers. So there is a real difference there. It's not necessarily, Becky, that the U.S. doesn't trust Ukraine to fire on Russia. And we should note that there have been a number of cross-border incidents into Russia that Ukraine has neither confirmed nor denied. But this is highlighting the concern by the Biden administration that if they were to send the longest range munitions, that Russia would see this as an escalation. And indeed, we are hearing the Kremlin today saying that they are seeing these new munitions as a provocation. Becky?
Fascinating. I think it's really important that you bring up that both of these gentlemen suggested this war will end at the negotiating table, that they suggest providing as much leverage ahead of that for Ukraine. Perhaps at some point, it is that the West will say, you've had your lot, you've got to negotiate. And the question will be whether Ukrainians really believe they got what they needed in order to sufficiently push back against the Russians. Fascinating. Alex, thank you very much indeed. Coming up, is this a show of solidarity for Russia? We look at the Russian foreign minister's meeting with his Gulf counterparts in Saudi Arabia. And ahead on the show, as people are finally able to leave their homes in Shanghai, the relief but also anger that lingers in China's business capital. That coming up after this. Relief has finally come to Shanghai in China as the government there finally loosens COVID restrictions that had people confined to their homes or quarantine centres for over 2 months. But for many, there is still lingering bitterness over having been put through what they describe as a draconian lockdown. Not everyone is allowed to leave their homes just yet, and many rules are still in place. CNN's Selena Wang is in Beijing, and she joins me now live. And I've seen your report that our viewers are about to see, and some of the images are really quite remarkable. And I think there will be people watching this around the world who are astonished to see the sort of what is going on in Shanghai, and will understand why people are so frustrated there. Just describe what's going on. One of those times, isn't
Becky,
it? When
sorry, you're just breaking up. Becky, well, actually, a lot of our report is being censored on this topic, and you were just breaking up in my ear earlier. But while most of Shanghai's 25 million residents are allowed out, more than 500,000, however, are still remaining in lockdown. And for some people, this is going to be short-lived freedom, because if a new COVID case is found, that person and all their close contacts, they've got to go to quarantine facilities, and the community is then back into lockdown. And the days leading up to this moment, Becky, they have been utter chaos.
Sprinting with shopping bags, residents racing to get out. After more than 2 months of a brutal citywide lockdown, Shanghai is finally cracking open the seal. The city's main train station packed with people trying to escape, but actually getting out of here is a treacherous journey. The city says it will fully resume transportation today. But earlier, people have been seen trekking miles across highways, dragging their luggage or strapping it to bikes. Even journeys of dozens of miles or more, not swaying their determination. The train station parking lot has become a campsite, some leaving days earlier than their departure time, terrified they could be locked down again if they stay at home. The masses outside the train station, a stark contrast to the rest of Shanghai. Hundreds of thousands still remain locked in. But even the lucky ones allowed out face a laundry list of restrictions. There are checkpoints everywhere.
No, this is definitely not freedom.
This Shanghai resident and her son, who wished to remain anonymous for fear of persecution from authorities, were finally allowed out after more than 80 days. Her only solace is seeing her son outside and smiling for the first time in a long time.
My child now has depression because of the lockdown. He started waking up at night and crying and shouting and saying there were people wearing masks in his bedroom, and he stopped eating.
That harsh reality miles away from what the government wants to show. Watch this state TV reporter pull the microphone and camera away during a live interview when the resident starts to complain about the lockdown. She says, "I've never lived through anything like this, being locked inside your home and not allowed to go out. What a big joke." Officials say the city will start returning to normal in June, but residents are doubtful.
So this does feel like endless nightmare.
Her freedom lasted less than a week. One COVID case was found near her, so she's back to lockdown. For over 2 months, Shanghai has had its freedom taken away, residents imprisoned at home or forced into quarantine centers like these. No one knows when this nightmare will fully end.
And Becky, authorities here have actually refused to acknowledge that it was in fact a lockdown, instead calling it, quote, static management mode. That has caused frustration and bitterness among residents who say authorities are not acknowledging the suffering and the struggles they've been through. In fact, the entirety of this report and what I'm saying right now is all being censored on TV screens in China. All you are seeing is color bars. So a mixture of relief, joy, but also anxiety and anger in Shanghai. Becky.
Selena Wang on the story for you. Thank you. Well, still ahead, Russia's foreign minister is in Saudi Arabia in a seeming show of solidarity with Gulf states. What is the US doing to keep up its relations with Riyadh? Well, we will discuss all of that up next. Russia's foreign minister continuing his Middle East tour today with a visit to Saudi Arabia. Sergei Lavrov sat down with his Gulf counterparts in Riyadh. Now, that followed a stop in Bahrain on Tuesday, the same day the EU announced a ban on most Russian oil imports. Note, the OPEC Plus alliance, which Russia, of course, is a part of, meets tomorrow. And that meeting in Riyadh comes amid reports oil producers are exploring the idea of suspending Russia from the OPEC Plus production deal. Reuters reports that was not discussed in today's OPEC Plus joint technical meeting in Vienna. There's quite a lot to unpack here. Faisal Abbas is editor-in-chief of Arab News. And your organisation conducted a poll with YouGov, which examined the attitudes on the Arab street to the conflict in Ukraine. The findings were quite illuminating. They suggest an apathy and disinterest in the Arab world towards this atrocious conflict. Faisal, 66% of respondents said they had no stance on the war, while those who did choose a side were almost evenly divided. 18% backed Ukraine and 16% backed Russia. You're joining me from our studio in Dubai today, and I want to discuss what we think that poll revealed. Before we do that, what do you believe the aim of Lavrov's visit is to Riyadh to meet his Gulf counterparts, and what do you believe will be achieved?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on your show, Becky. I believe the GCC ministerial level meeting, which Secretary Lavrov attended, shows a unified GCC position behind Saudi Arabia, which has clearly said from the beginning that we wish to become a mediator and try to have a positive impact on finding a peaceful resolution to this conflict. I just wish to remind your viewers also that the Saudi foreign minister met with his Ukrainian counterpart last week in Davos, and I believe there's been also a Zoom meeting between the GCC ministers and the Ukrainian foreign minister via Zoom today. So if anything, it shows that on this conflict, Saudi Arabia and the GCC is putting their efforts where their words are and trying to mediate between both parties.
Right. What they haven't done, and I'm specifically speaking to the Saudis here, is sort of bend to the will of Washington, which has lent heavily, as we understand it, into Riyadh to actually take a side in all of this, not least when it comes to upping the support for the oil market as Russia is heavily sanctioned by the West. Do you believe that we are seeing a body of Gulf states who to this point have stayed neutral in this Russia-Ukraine conflict, despite these Western calls to help isolate Moscow? Do you believe that there is a pivot in that position at this point or not?
Well, if you'd allow me, Becky, I would beg to differ. Saudi Arabia and I believe the United Arab Emirates and most GCC countries have condemned the aggression on Ukraine on a UN level. Now, I'm not an oil expert and I don't really understand the mechanics of the oil market, but at least what we're seeing here is a positive contribution towards this conflict. At the end of the day, both parties need to be talking to a trusted partner, and I think the GCC as a bloc can provide that. Whether or not Saudi Arabia or oil exporting countries cut down or increase rather their production is a fair question. But, you know, a fairer question would also be, you know, why hasn't the EU, for example, Germany, we've heard in the report earlier that, you know, they've just yesterday, 3 months, 100 days actually into the conflict, finally decided to stop importing oil. The EU pays €1 billion a day to Russia for oil and gas. Nobody's talking about the gas. So, you know, if sanctions is what will solve this conflict, then surely the European Union should start first.
Yeah, Faisal, I hear what you're saying, and you're making some very valid points. And unfortunately, I have run out of time with you today because we had to rightly cover the Stoltenberg-Blinken press conference. I will have you back because this is a conversation we should continue. Faisal Abbas has probably forgotten more about Gulf politics than most of us will ever know. So you're an important asset to the show, Faisal. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I've got to take a short break at this point. Back after this. If you are in the UK or headed here for the next 4 days, prepare to party. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II is celebrating 70 years on the throne, a first for any British monarch. It all started here back in the early 1950s when a 25-year-old Princess Elizabeth was driven in a golden carriage to Westminster Abbey and crowned following the death of her father, King George VI. It was the first time a coronation service was televised. Well, 25 years later, the Queen celebrated the Silver Jubilee, with the UK just recovering from a recession caused by the 1973 oil crisis. I remember that. We had a street party. Times were hard. And not unlike today, there was a cost of living crisis, but despite that, there were thousands of spirited street parties like the one held where I lived as a kid. Fast forward to 2002, and there's the gold stage coach again. It's been 50 years since the coronation, and by the way, that coach has been around for 260 years. Well, it might look nice, but it makes for an uncomfortable ride, according to both Queen Victoria, Queen Elizabeth, and King George VI. Well, 10 years ago, Her Majesty reached another milestone, her Diamond Jubilee. Only one other monarch has reached 60 years on the throne, and that was Queen Victoria. A flotilla of boats took to the river, and though the day was rather cloudy and windy, the royal barge was cheered by thousands of people lining the river. Well, this Thursday marks a first, as I mentioned, the start of a 4-day party for what is the Platinum Jubilee, an occasion for the country to deck their houses with flags and decorate even post boxes with knitted corgis, tea cozies, if you will. The highlight of Thursday will be the Trooping of the Colour, and here you can see the horses taken for rehearsals. The Golden Coach has also been seen on the streets of London for the first time in 20 years. The Queen not expected to ride inside this time. She will, though, appear on the balcony, we are told, at Buckingham Palace to wave at crowds for the first time without her husband, Prince Philip. Of course, he passed away last year. Other senior royals are expected to be represented and present with the Queen at celebrations in Wales, in Northern Ireland and Scotland. We will have extensive coverage of the Queen's Jubilee in the coming days. Well, if you don't follow golf closely, there is, I will tell you, a spot of trouble on the green. The PGA is far from happy with a decision taken by two-time major winner Dustin Johnson. This has to do with a lucrative offer that the US golfer felt, well, he could not refuse. World Sport anchor Patrick Snell to explain exactly what it is that Johnson has done, which has angered the PGA as much as it has. Patrick?
Yeah, Becky, hi. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out, because we're all watching with intent, because America's PGA Tour, remember, has not granted permission for its players to compete elsewhere, and they could reportedly be set to face punishment for their decision. So the ball now very much in the PGA Tour's court. Johnson has a huge stature in the game, no question. He's a former world number one, Becky, a two-time major winner. He's won the US Open, he's won the Masters, but we now know he's going to be the headline act at the highly controversial and lucrative Saudi-backed league, whose CEO is Aussie golf great Greg Norman. And I'm hearing that we have just heard from the PGA Tour, so we'll get to that in World Sport in just a few moments, Becky.
You are such a tease. That is coming up after this short break. That's it from us. Same place, same time tomorrow. See you then.
Hi there, welcome to CNN World Sport today, where we're counting down now to today's going to be emotion-filled World Cup playoff qualifier in Glasgow, where Scotland will be hosting Ukraine. A match unlike any other. 32 nations will be competing in the World Cup in Qatar later on this year. We know the identity thus far of all but three. The winner of today's match in Glasgow, Ukraine, will then be playing Wales on Sunday. It's going to be Ukraine or Scotland to face Wales. Whoever emerges will be joining England, Iran and the USA in Group B in November. Now, Ukraine hasn't played a competitive match since Russia's invasion of their homeland in February. But as they try to qualify for the World Cup, they're going to be having the support, no question, of so many people around the world, and emotions certain to be running very high indeed later at Hampden Park. These now the very powerful and really heartbreaking words of Ukraine's Oleksandr Zinchenko. Take a listen.
Що я мрію про те, щоб війна закінчилась. Але якщо кажучи про футбол, то у нас теж є мрія. У нас є своя мрія. Мрія поїхати на чемпіонат світу. Та подарувати ці емоції українцям в цей непростий час. Тому що вони цього заслуговують.
Oh, just really poignant indeed to hear those words. My senior World Sport colleague Alex Thomas for us in Glasgow and was right there at that news conference. Alex, it must have been so very moving to be there. Just how unusual is it to see that kind of raw emotion?
Very unusual, Patrick. A very somber mood in that news conference. And the other unusual thing was to see Zinchenko applauded out of the room. He left early to go and join his teammates for their last practice before the match later on Wednesday. And, you know, journalists are there to be impartial, not to applaud one side or the other, but everyone knew what he was going through. And he said at another point in that press conference, I can't describe what it's like to be playing football, knowing the heartache and misery going on back home. You have to be in my position to feel it. And we all understood that. And in fact, Scotland do as well. Ukraine in a tough position. The players know what's going on back home, but they've been told from the very top, right up to Ukrainian President Zelensky, to focus on the football, to try and put a smile back on the faces of their compatriots by winning this football match. Yes, it's just a game, but it's taken on a wider significance. Only once as an independent nation since the breakup of the former Soviet Union have Ukraine qualified for a men's FIFA World Cup during the golden era of Andrei Shevchenko. And they would love to do that again. That was back in 2006. You have to go back even further for the last time Scotland reached a men's FIFA World Cup. But there will not only be a couple of thousand Ukraine fans in Hampden Park behind me cheering them on, but probably a lot of goodwill amongst the Scottish population generally. We know they've been given a warm welcome. Some refugees from the Ukrainian war have been housed here in Scotland, some given free tickets to this game. They're going to put the words to the Ukraine national anthem on the seats of spectators in the hope that they'll join in singing it. And I think some probably will. And we already know that anecdotally, many famous former Scottish players have said they'll kind of be supporting Ukraine in some way as well. So a lot of goodwill for Ukraine, but they know that when it comes to the actual match, they still need to play good enough football to get past Scotland later on Wednesday and indeed Wales in Cardiff on Sunday if they're to reach Qatar 2022, Patrick.
Yeah, there's the game in hand, the serious business of the game in hand, albeit, you know, it's going to be so emotional, is it, Alex? I wonder, how do you feel Scotland are going to be approaching this match?
Yeah, definitely mixed feelings. They know they need to focus on what they have to do and try and ignore the situation Ukraine are in, although Ukraine have praised Scotland for agreeing so readily to delay this match in the first place from when it was originally scheduled, to give them enough time to try and prepare for it. They've had a month in Slovenia warming up for it, had 3 games against club sides to try and get back into the mood and try and shake off the rust. And this was what the Scotland manager, Steve Clarke, made of it.
Nothing but good thoughts for them and good wishes for them, except during the game, because obviously they want to go to Qatar and represent their country, but I'm desperate to go to Qatar with Scotland. My staff are desperate to go, and most importantly, our players are desperate to take their country to a World Cup final, so that's what we focus on.
And normally Scotland are really assured of a noisy and passionate following. I don't expect that to change once the whistle for the start of the game goes. Around 50,000 expected here in Hampden Park, a complete sellout.
Yeah, and in terms of the game itself, purely now, Alex, in footballing terms, how might it all play out? What do you think?
It's hard to tell, Patrick. Ukraine are undercooked in football terms, but are ranked higher in the world. They've got really fond memories of Hampden Park, because they beat Sweden here in the European Championships last year, 2-1, going on to a quarter-final where they lost to eventual finalists England. But Scotland had the better record in qualifying, although they both finished runners-up in their group. Ukraine only won twice, although the rest were all draws. They weren't beaten by the world champions France in that qualifying process. Scotland had far more wins in their group, but they're both here in a playoff. It's a one-off game, so really anything can happen.
And we shall see later on today. Alex Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today in Glasgow. Well, back in February this year, US golf superstar Dustin Johnson saying he was fully committed to the PGA Tour. Now, though, ahead of the controversial Saudi-backed league, the dramatic U-turn the former Masters champion has just made, and what his agent says actually prompted it. Welcome back. A 33rd straight victory now for top-ranked Iga Swiatek a little early at the French Tennis Open in Paris as the recently turned 21-year-old booking her spot in the last four. Her birthday was yesterday and she celebrates with a really impressive victory today. Another one. The Polish player just too good for Jessica Pegula of the United States. The 2020 Roland Garros champ seeing off her American opponent very comfortably indeed in straight sets, 3-2. Next up was Swiatek in the semis, the number 20 seed from Russia, Daria Kasatkina. Well, the world of tennis still very much abuzz after another epic confrontation between the sport's two undisputed greats. I'm talking Rafa Nadal and Novak Djokovic, a hugely anticipated encounter. It started around 9 p.m. local time and didn't end until after 1 a.m. the following morning. The man from Mallorca, who's going for a record-extending 22nd Grand Slam title, had been pushed to the limits, remember, by the young Canadian player Felix Auger-Aliassime in the round of 16, but he would come out really blistering fashion here in this quarterfinal. Classic, all business, all focus. Nadal taking the opener 6-2. Now, Djokovic had to call upon all his famed powers of grit and resilience. And in a second set that lasted 88 minutes, he produces the response many were expecting, levelling the match at 1-all. Bear in mind, too, the Serbian player was aiming for career major number 21 to tie Nadal, but that just really seemed to fire Nadal up. He takes the third 6-2. And the fourth set serving up some stunning play as well between these two ferocious rivals. Nadal saving 2 set points on the Djokovic serve, and from 5-2 down, he then gets it back to 5-all before the 13-time winner eventually goes on to seal victory in the tiebreaker. Remember, the Spaniard is a player who feared his career could have been over last year due to persistent foot issues, and you sense he still doesn't take anything at all for granted in terms of how much longer he has left.
Well, I told you that in Rome that I'm gonna have my doctor here with me. That having the doctor here, you can do things that helps. No, so it's not the moment to talk about that. I said that we're gonna talk about that after the tournament, when my tournament finish. But yeah, I am putting everything that I have to try to play this tournament with the best conditions possible. Now, I don't know what can happen after, honestly, but here I think I'm gonna be fine.
Well, it was just a few months ago now that two-time major winner Dustin Johnson declared he was fully committed, as he put it, to the PGA Tour. This was amid speculation over who would be competing in the new and indeed highly lucrative Saudi-backed golf league, whose CEO is Australian golf great Greg Norman. Well, fast forward to today, June the 1st, and we now know the former world number one Johnson is one of the names in the 48-man field for the league's first event in England next week. That tournament near London being held opposite the PGA Tour's Canadian Open in Toronto, where Johnson is a former champion, by the way. Organisers at that Toronto event expressing their disappointment with his decision. And within the last few minutes, I can tell you a statement from the PGA Tour with this: as communicated to our entire membership on May 10th, PGA Tour members have not been authorised to participate in the Saudi Golf League's London event under PGA Tour tournament regulations. Members who violate the tournament regulations are subject to disciplinary action. Meantime, Johnson's agent saying the opportunity is just too good to pass up. Meantime, what about Phil Mickelson? Well, the initial list of players not including the 6-time major winner, though he could still be a factor. Still 6 spots up for grabs. The American left-hander has been on kind of a self-imposed hiatus from the sport since February after a backlash following controversial comments he made about the breakaway tour. This is a fast-evolving story. We'll stay across all the very latest for you. You can be sure of that. That'll do it for this World Sport. Before we go, though, a huge week on the international golf calendar. All eyes on the US Women's Open, where a number of very storied names are among the elite field. Taking centre stage, we're going to leave you now with our latest Rolex Minute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher in New York and this is One World. Ukraine says that Russian forces are unleashing a savage assault on eastern Ukraine, carpet bombing a key region with a barrage of artillery, mortar and rocket attacks. One local official says that Moscow now controls 70% of Severodonetsk, a strategic city central to the Kremlin's overall strategy. And he claims that some government troops have retreated to, quote, more advantageous positions elsewhere. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is slamming Russia's indiscriminate bombardment, calling it insanity following a strike on a chemical plant in Severodonetsk. Russian-backed forces blamed Ukrainian troops for the explosion. Germany's foreign minister is accusing Moscow of trying to extinguish civilization in the Donbass region. As the fighting rages on, Russia is warning a third country could get dragged into the conflict. It comes after the US agreed to supply Ukraine with more advanced missile systems. During a press conference with the NATO chief in Washington just a short time ago, the US Secretary of State played down those concerns.
The Ukrainians have given us assurances that they will not use these systems against targets on Russian territory. There is a strong trust bond between Ukraine and the United States, as well as with our allies and partners. President Biden was very clear with President Putin about what the United States would do if Russia proceeded with its aggression, including continuing to provide security assistance that Ukraine needs to defend itself against the Russian aggression.
CNN's Melissa Bell is in southeastern Ukraine for us, but first let me bring in Kylie Atwood, who's joining us live now from the State Department. So Kylie, let's just talk about weapons that the US is sending. What is the difference between the weapons that the US wants to send Ukraine and is going to send Ukraine versus the types of weapons that Ukraine believes that it truly needs in order to defend itself?
Well, this is all a matter of how far these weapons can go. And that is a concern, of course, because the United States doesn't want to give the Ukrainians weapons that could go too far into Russian territory, because then, of course, that could make this conflict even more escalatory in nature. What the Biden administration is saying is that they want to give Ukraine a stronger type of weapons so that they are able to more effectively defend themselves against these Russian aggressions, but they don't want to give them weapons that are going to, as the Secretary of State said, be used to target Russian territory. So the Ukrainians are essentially making the argument that they need any weaponry that is the most effective in this situation and can go the furthest. But our understanding is that the Biden administration is going to be giving them these systems that they want, but not necessarily with the range that they are capable of going, because they don't want this to become a more provocative sharing of weapons. They want this to just shore up what Ukraine has already been able to do.
And Kylie, I want to bring in Melissa, who's been covering Severodonetsk. So, Melissa, just explain to us how much of a difference will these weapons that the US is sending Ukraine, how much of a difference will it make to the outcome of the battle that is raging in the eastern part of the country?
Saying the communications are extremely poor here, because here in the Zaporizhzhia region, it is 3 out of the 5 districts of this greater region that have had communications cut entirely. And I think to your question, though, it explains the significance to Ukraine's armed forces of that announcement just made by Secretary of State Blinken, confirming the news that we'd had this morning, that some of those weapon systems, and I'm speaking here particularly of those long-range rocket systems, would be given within a range of 49 miles. And this place I'm speaking to you from, I think, think tells a story of why they are so crucial to Ukraine's fight, why they've been asking for them for the course of the last few days. You have that long line between the territories currently held by Russian forces and the rest of Ukraine. Here in Zaporizhzhia, for instance, it is 30 miles down the Dnieper that the first Russian positions are. As I mentioned a moment ago, the communications are already extremely patchy. We have sirens going off fairly regularly here because it is the villages just to the south of Zaporizhzhia that are being shelled day and night by Russian artillery. And what Ukrainian armed forces, both the men on the ground, the head of the regional administration, military administration here have been telling us, but also Ukrainian military intelligence sources have been telling us for the last few days, is that the feeling within Ukraine is that at the moment Russian forces have the upper hand. What they believe is that by getting some of these long-range rocket systems, not simply a range that can hit targets of up to 49 miles, but also much more advanced, much more sophisticated in terms of the ability of the rockets, but also the munitions that the Biden administration have said they will now be providing to Ukraine to guide themselves towards their targets. Ukraine feels that that will help them in their fight against this very long line, along which part of their effort is on the back foot. We've seen that in Severodonetsk. Even now, that city that appears to be falling to Russian forces, Ukrainian armed forces mounting that counter-offensive to the south, and where I'm standing now, further along down the Dnieper, trying to get back that crucial city of Kherson, the only point that Russian forces have, the only city that they have to the west of the Dnieper River. That is the focus of their fighting. But for the last few days, there has been a sense here in Ukraine and all along this line that the advantage is to the Russian side. And I think that speaks to the points that were just made by Secretary of State Blinken, that we don't know how long this war is going to last. It could last for many more months. Right now it is in the hands of Russia to bring an end to this, and for the time being all Washington can do is stand by the commitment President Biden had made loud and clear at the start of this, that they would be helping Ukraine where they could to defend themselves. Zane.
Yeah, and this idea that, according to Secretary Blinken, that when this war ends, it will be because of the negotiating table, nothing else. Melissa Bell, live for us there. Kylie Atwood, thank you both so much. All right, to Shanghai now, where crowds are back on the streets celebrating the easing of COVID-19 restrictions. After 2 months under a strict lockdown, a very strict lockdown, the government is finally allowing most residents to leave their communities. Many businesses are reopening and the transit system is back up and running. But a full return to normality could take time, with some restrictions staying in place for the time being. CNN's Selena Wang is live for us in Beijing. So the past few months have been incredibly traumatic for people living in Shanghai. And I think the scary thing is that, if more COVID cases are found, certain neighborhoods could go under lockdown at any moment.
That's exactly right. It's been such a traumatic few months, and this freedom, they're finally feeling this relief. Well, for some, it could be short-lived, because if a new COVID case is found, that community immediately goes back into lockdown. That person and all their close contacts go back into quarantine. So a mixture of emotions here. Also, some disbelief, because the days leading up to this moment, Zane, have been utter chaos.
Sprinting with shopping bags, residents racing to get out. After more than 2 months of a brutal citywide lockdown, Shanghai is finally cracking open the seal. The city's main train station packed with people trying to escape, but actually getting out of here is a treacherous journey. The city says it will fully resume transportation today. But earlier, people have been seen trekking miles across highways, dragging their luggage or strapping it to bikes. Even journeys of dozens of miles or more, not swaying their determination. The train station parking lot has become a campsite, some leaving days earlier than their departure time, terrified they could be locked down again if they stay at home. The masses outside the train station, a stark contrast to the rest of Shanghai. Hundreds of thousands still remain locked in. But even the lucky ones allowed out face a laundry list of restrictions. There are checkpoints everywhere.
No, this is definitely not freedom.
This Shanghai resident and her son, who wished to remain anonymous for fear of persecution from authorities, were finally allowed out after more than 80 days. Her only solace is seeing her son outside and smiling for the first time in a long time.
My child now has depression because of the lockdown. He started waking up at night and crying and shouting and saying there were people wearing masks in his bedroom, and he stopped eating.
That harsh reality miles away from what the government wants to show. Watch this state TV reporter pull the microphone and camera away during a live interview when the resident starts to complain about the lockdown. She says, "I've never lived through anything like this, being locked inside your home and not allowed to go out. What a big joke." Officials say the city will start returning to normal in June, but residents are doubtful.
So this does feel like endless nightmare.
Her freedom lasted less than a week. One COVID case was found near her, so she's back to lockdown. For over 2 months, Shanghai has had its freedom taken away, residents imprisoned at home or forced into quarantine centers like these. No one knows when this nightmare will fully end.
This entire report was censored on TV screens in China, and what I'm saying right now, in screens here, you are just seeing color bars on TV screens here in Beijing. The government in Shanghai, they have refused to even call this lockdown a, quote, lockdown, instead calling it, quote, static management. So there is some bitterness here that authorities have not acknowledged the suffering and the difficulties they've struggled with to get enough food and daily essentials and medical care. Countless heartbreaking stories of people being turned away, emergency patients being turned away from hospitals because of COVID policy. So there's frustration that there's been no acknowledgement of it. And this 2-month brutal lockdown has been a wake-up call to Shanghai that in authoritarian China, you could have your freedoms taken away in an instant. Even in the country's wealthiest, most cosmopolitan city, there is no guarantee in China that this nightmare won't happen all over again. Zane?
Yeah, it's unimaginable to think about what people have been through there over the past couple of months. Lena Wang, live for us. Thank you so much. The Uvalde, Texas School District Police Chief has managed to evade media for days. Today, though, CNN exclusively caught up with and confronted him. Pete Arredondo, seen here outside his home earlier today, wearing his badge and gun, led the botched response to last week's massacre at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Officials say it was Arredondo who decided not to immediately breach the locked classrooms where the shooter had holed up with children and teachers, choosing instead to wait for keys and tactical gear. Take a look at the interaction between CNN's Shimon Prokupecz today outside Arredondo's office.
About your decision and what the DPS director said.
How's it going? Good. I'm Pete. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I want to talk to you about the decision and what
department we're doing, but just to let y'all know, and I just spoke with.
I know you did. But
you're not blocking me, are you?
No.
No.
Turn this way.
No, just so y'all know. Just so you all know, obviously, we're not going to release anything. We have people in our community being buried, sir. So we're going to be respectful.
I just want your reaction to the director McGraw saying that you were responsible for the decision to go into that room. How do you explain yourself to the parents?
We're going to be respectful to the family.
I understand that, but you have an opportunity
to explain
yourself to the parents.
And just so you know, we're going to do that eventually, obviously.
When?
And whenever this is done, we'll let the families quit grieving, then we'll do that, obviously. And just so everybody knows, we've been in contact with DPS every day, just so you all know.
They say that you're not cooperating.
I've been on the phone with them every day.
But they say you're not cooperating. So just 2 seconds.
Just so you know, we've been talking to them every day.
What is your reaction?
Y'all have a good day.
What is your reaction, sir?
CNN's Shimon Prokupecz joins us live now from Uvalde. Shimon, excellent job holding his feet to the fire, trying to hold him accountable and ask those pressing questions there. But how much has public trust in the Uvalde Police Department been eroded in just the past week?
Well, it's been eroded a great deal here. Talking to people here in the community, talking to family members, they're having a hard time trusting what's coming from the police because of all the contradictions that we've been getting. So that's why this is sort of important. It's important for them to answer questions. The police chief has not been at any of the press conferences that the state police have been holding. He's not addressed any of our questions. We've not been able to reach him. So today we were able to see him leaving his home and then going to his house, and so that's where, to his office, and that's where we were able to ask the questions.
Shimon, I'm so sorry, I was having trouble with your audio there, but thank you so much for being with us. All right, still to come here, no sign yet of a verdict in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial. We'll look at the societal impact of the case and what some say could be dangerous consequences. At this hour, a jury in Fairfax, Virginia is deliberating the defamation case of actors Johnny Depp and Amber Heard for a third day. Depp is suing his ex-wife for $50 million and Heard is countersuing for $100 million. He claims Heard's 2018 op-ed in the Washington Post hurt his career. In it, she called herself a public figure representing domestic abuse. In her countersuit, Heard claimed she was defamed by Depp's lawyer, who called her abuse allegations a hoax. Trial watchers have consumed every minute of the 6-week trial, which had its share of compelling moments. Take a listen.
Johnny promised me he would ruin me, that he'd ruin my career, he'd take my life from me. Death was the only way out, and if I got out, this is what he'd do to me. He'd make me think of him every single day. He promised me global humiliation.
Have never in my life committed sexual battery, physical abuse, all these outlandish, outrageous stories of me committing these things.
Right, many of those commenting took a side, but others spoke of the danger of such a serious topic being turned into entertainment. Actress Drew Barrymore called it a 7-layer dip of insanity and then apologized for the quip. Former Spice Girl Mel B says to look at this case as entertainment is damaging, referring to the seriousness of spousal abuse allegations. And Monica Lewinsky calls it courtroom porn, saying that no matter who wins the trial, we, the spectators, are all guilty. So is the sensationalism of this trial robbing it of its humanity? Let's bring in David Glass. He's a certified family law specialist with a PhD in clinical psychology. David, thank you so much for being with us. So what are your thoughts on this trial overall? In terms of just the overall sensationalism aspect of it and how it is basically being turned into entertainment, but also what your expectation is for deliberations in terms of how long that part could last and which way the verdict is likely to go at this point.
Yeah, the sensationalism portion of this trial is the unfortunate result of both parties throwing as much mud as they can at each other, trying to prove their case. But in the end, a defamation case isn't about all these awful things they've said about each other and all the awful things they claim the other has done. It comes down to very specific things that the jury has to look for. And that's where the jury is now. This deliberation is going to take some time because the jury has 6 weeks of testimony that they've taken notes on and physical exhibits that they have to review and 38 pages of jury instruction that they have to go through before they can come to a verdict either way or no way.
And when you think about, I mean, everyone has talked about the fact that nobody comes out of this looking good. Both of their careers are in shambles after this. But I think that Amber Heard, just according to public opinion at least, Amber Heard has emerged as the least sympathetic figure of the two. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a continuing cultural phenomenon where the pendulum swings. So for a while, the Me Too movement basically said we need to believe all women who come forward with abuse allegations. And that's a fair thing to do. But now the pendulum has swung the other way with people claiming that these abuse allegations are made up, or in this case, a hoax. And it just comes down to how many fans each of these parties has. While Amber Heard has $8 million followers on TikTok or social media, Johnny Depp has 18 million. And so that's the court of public opinion is on his side. I'm not sure the jury is going to follow public opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, audio evidence that sort of shows what some people have referred to as mutual abuse by the two of them as well.
That's right. This case comes down to what a Los Angeles family law judge used to say when he would say that Mother Teresa doesn't get married to Attila the Hun. These are both damaged people. They have their own specific flaws. They both look to their relationships to create chaos and emotional intensity, I think, to make them feel like they are still alive and still existing and still relevant. And that's what led to their very troubled relationship, which only lasted about a year.
Some people say that the real winner in this trial is Johnny Depp's lawyer, Camille Vasquez. What is it about her style and her talent and her skill, to be honest, that has managed to win the sort of admiration, I guess, of so many?
Ms. Vasquez's skill is in making herself very personable. Lawyers aren't trained this way. We're trained to think in a very definitive way, to look for black and white, to present the evidence. But what she has done is shown a very personal side to Johnny Depp. All the allegations or speculation as to her relationship with Johnny Depp, I think, is just her trying to show the jury that Johnny Depp is not a scary person. He's not someone that you need to shy away from. She's fine putting her arm on his shoulder. She's fine sitting next to him or joking with him. And to the extent that that affected the jury's decision making, I think it was very well planned.
And have we actually ever seen anything quite like this? I mean, what is this case comparable to? And the decision actually to go to trial. I mean, when you think about defamation lawsuits, obviously happens all the time. One person settles, there's usually some kind of a negotiation. That decision to actually be willing to take this all the way to a public trial is quite a bold one.
Yeah, and I think that Johnny Depp never really intended to win this defamation trial. He had already lost a defamation trial that he brought in the UK against the paper for publishing a statement that he was a wife beater. And in the United Kingdom, it's a lot easier to make a defamation case than it is in the United States because there's no First Amendment protection. So his bringing this case in the United States, I think, was more about mobilizing his public, improving his public persona, getting all of his people to start posting on social media so that he can go back to Hollywood and say, see, I still demand attention. I can still sell a movie. Right now I have 18 million people who are following me actively, in addition to all the other people who are on my side.
That's certainly an interesting viewpoint. All right, David Glass, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, still to come here on One World, securing Nigeria's future as the nation prepares for next year's election. I'll speak to a leading businessman about what the country needs to grow and thrive. Hello and welcome back to One World. Let's catch up on the headlines. In Brazil, the death toll now stands at more than 100 after heavy rain triggered flooding and mudslides in the country's northeast. This is the fourth major flooding event to hit Brazil in the last 5 months, according to Reuters. Officials warn that more floods and landslides are very likely. In 2 weeks, the UK will begin flying asylum seekers to Rwanda, where their cases will be processed. The migrants will reportedly be housed in hotels and apartments. The Home Office says that anyone who arrived in the UK illegally after the 1st of January could be relocated. Human rights groups say the plan is ill-conceived, impractical and inhumane. The UK is getting ready to celebrate the longest reigning monarch in British history. Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee kicks off on Thursday, marking her 70 years on the throne. Events are set to take place over the 4-day holiday. Nigeria is gearing up for presidential elections next year. Just last week, the main opposition party picked its candidate, former Vice President Atiku Abubakar. And the ruling APC party will make its choice at a convention next week. Whoever succeeds the current president, Muhammadu Buhari, will face a wide range of national emergencies. Here's what's at stake in Nigeria. The country is dealing with mounting insecurity from the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast to kidnappings for ransom plaguing the northwest. Endemic corruption also poses a threat to the government's stability. The next president will also have to navigate Africa's biggest economy through very, very uncertain times with, for example, high inflation, slow growth and a shrinking labour market as well. All right, time now for the exchange and a deeper look at Nigeria's economic development. Earlier, I spoke with Tony Elumelu, one of the country's most famous businessmen and philanthropists. I asked him what it will take to help the continent prosper, Africa as a whole, and the international community's role in that. So the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, did a virtual visit of Nigeria just last year where he talked about the importance of trade, good governance, economic development. Does the US have a role in creating a much more economically empowered Africa? And if so, what do you think that role should be?
Good to meet you, Zen. Yes, I think that United States has a key role to play in helping to catalyze economic development and prosperity in Nigeria and in Africa. The tie between Nigeria, Africa, and the US is very strong. Every kid grows up in Nigeria and Africa, aspiring to behave like an American. There's strong cultural influence here. And I believe that our political leadership differs a lot to also America. And it would be nice for America to realize its role in its role and influence in Africa, and that can be galvanized more positively in helping to catalyze development.
Yeah, so the government has a key role, as you point out, in creating an enabling environment. But when you think about right now the ease of doing business in Nigeria, I mean, it's still quite problematic, from inflation to the energy crisis to unemployment. I mean, there are all sorts of headwinds for young entrepreneurs. What do you think the role of the private sector is in creating a much more business-friendly environment for dynamic and creative young entrepreneurs to thrive?
I speak from experience. At the Tony Elumelu Foundation, which my family founded in 2010, we help to catalyze and encourage young African, young Nigerians to go into entrepreneurship, to embrace entrepreneurship as a way of helping themselves, their communities, and the country. And one of the areas I believe the private sector must play a role, and government in part also, would be to help to catalyze luck, to help to democratize luck, to help share part of their prosperity with these young upcoming Africans and Nigerians, so that all of us collectively can do more in helping to eradicate poverty, in helping to drive youth employment, in helping to catalyze employment in a manner and scale that one single corporate cannot do.
Nigeria has a general election in about 9 or so months from now. What do you think the country needs from new leadership in order to unleash the country's full economic potential?
We need to deal with insecurity in the country. There's so much private capital looking for the right investment destination in the world. That capital will not come to Nigeria if we do not fix insecurity in the country. We need to make sure that we help improve on infrastructure. Crude oil production has gone down because of theft in the Niger Delta area. We need to fix this. There's so much happening in the world in terms of oil price has gone up. But my country is not benefiting from this because of
but when you say, Tony, that we need to fix the issue when it comes to crude oil theft, I mean, you've spoken about this a lot. You've been very, very adamant about that. What specifically should the government be doing now?
So it's a major issue. And I believe that the government should continue to emphasize this so that we can... The oil is our commonwealth in the country. And how can a few people be stealing this commonwealth of the country, plundering it? It's not good. And I believe this must be keeping government up at night. So we need to engage our security agency to do what they should do to help protect the integrity and territory of the country by making sure that things like this don't happen. Broad daylight is totally unacceptable.
As you know, climate change is a huge problem for Africa because Africa contributed the least to climate change, but it's set to bear the brunt of it. You've invested heavily in Nigeria's energy sector. How long before renewable sources of energy become a major player in Nigeria's power sector?
You know, Zen, the truth is we are suffering so much. Access to electricity, as I said, in Nigeria is extremely poor. Carbon emission in this part of the world, totally less than 2%. So we are not even at the point where we should be talking of this. However, it's important as members of the global community that the climate change effect is real, but we think that there should be a different kind of conversation that should allow developing countries, especially Nigeria, other African countries, to come up a bit. So there should be a deal to encourage, support countries, because if we don't be renewable to a large extent, it's limited in terms of capability or capacity to support the energy consumption that we need in this part of the world to even come to the basic level that others have experienced in other parts of the world.
Tony, I think the issue is that because the climate crisis is an emergency right now, a lot of the coastal communities across Africa are going to suffer. They're already suffering, actually, but they're going to suffer even more. They're going to pay a very, very high price because of climate change. We're talking about villages being destroyed, livelihoods and lives being lost at an ever-increasing rapid rate. So, given what you're saying, what sort of assistance can the international community provide to Africa, to Nigeria especially, since you're obviously from Nigeria, to make sure that you can meet the climate crisis as fully equipped and as prepared as you can possibly be?
You know, Zen, we are suffering the impact of this climate crisis. We're receiving much more than we're contributing or have contributed to it. And that, to me, is a major conversation that should be held. In the area of energy financing, we need a deal that supports African institutions and African economies to address this issue. We need to see support in the area of, again, as I said, access to electricity is so critical to Africa, and cutting funding in the energy area to Africa now is like stifling the entire continent to Nigeria. So we need to see in Nigeria a deal that prioritizes and encourages and supports energy funding.
Tony Elumelu, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zen.
Just hours from now, Ukraine's national football team will take on Scotland in a World Cup qualifier with a lot on the line. Not only are the players fighting for a spot in the FIFA tournament, they're also hoping to lift the spirits of their weary countrymen who have been fighting a war for more than 3 months now. CNN's Alex Thomas joins us live now from Glasgow. So Alex, after so many months of losses for Ukraine, I'm talking about obviously on the battlefield, this is one area where Ukrainians are desperately hoping for a win.
Yeah, Zain, it was the Real Madrid boss, Carlo Ancelotti, who once described football as the most important of the less important things in the world. And that's almost the perfect slogan for this World Cup qualifier. There's so much more at stake, certainly back in Ukraine right now, than just a game of football. But as you can probably hear and see a bit behind me, the atmosphere in a sunny Glasgow as Wednesday's gone on is getting more and more like any other game. We've got Ukrainian fans here looking forward to a football match that, if they were to win it, would put the team within one more victory of a place at Qatar 2022. And in Ukraine's history as an independent nation since the breakup of the former Soviet Union, they've only got to the men's FIFA World Cup once in their history, during a golden age with a star player like Andrei Shevchenko back in 2006. But you can tell that their emotions are very much split between what's going on back home and the pressure of representing their country in the current circumstances. Take a listen to one of their key star players, Manchester City's Alexander Zinchenko.
Що я мрію про те, щоб війна закінчилась. Але якщо кажучи про футбол, то у нас теж є мрія. У нас є своя мрія. Мрія поїхати на чемпіонат світу. Та подарувати ці емоції українцям. В цей непростий час. Тому що вони цього заслуговують.
You can see the emotions Zinchenko battling with there. Zayn, he was actually applauded out of the press conference, which, as you know, is very rare for journalists to do when we're meant to be impartial and just report the story on the facts. But even Ukraine's opponents, Scotland, understand there's more at stake than just a game of sport. And they've had mixed feelings, although they say they also want to win to reach the World Cup. The men's team in this country hasn't done that since 1998, even further back than Ukraine. They've certainly rolled out the welcome mat for Ukraine as much as they have, agreeing to delay this match after the war broke out back in Ukraine. So this is a delayed game. Some Ukrainian refugees have even settled here in Scotland, and some of them have been given free tickets to the game as well. But once the whistle goes for the start of the match, it'll just be two teams desperately trying to win a game of football. Zayn?
Yeah, but you brought up a good point about the fact that, you know, Scots are actually thinking very carefully about how they're approaching this match as well. There is so much emotion at stake here. Alex Thomas, live for us. Thanks so much. India has been rocked by the sudden death of an Indian star singer Krishna Kumar Kunath, known as KK. Tributes are pouring in for the 53-year-old. He passed away last night after performing a concert at a college in Kolkata. KK shot to fame after the 1999 release of his first solo album called Pal. His songs were used in hundreds of Bollywood films like this one. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi tweeted about KK's death, saying, "We will always remember him through his songs." Thank you so much for watching One World. I'm Zayn Asher. African Voices is up next. You're watching CNN.
we're revisiting some of the best moments from recent episodes of African Voices Changemakers. In KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, we spent a few days with a rowing legend who's giving back to his community through the sport.
That's it. It's not just about winning, it's about participating. And often the chap who just makes it into my Change Life team has had the hardest struggle to get there and has the biggest story to tell. So from my side, it's just about touching lives, giving people an opportunity to learn about what it takes to be successful, like the hard work, the discipline, the focus, goal setting. Good luck today. You must go into the channel. I use paddling through my Change Life Academy to empower the youth. I am Martin Dreyer, a paddler from South Africa, and I am a change maker.
Martin Dreyer is a local legend in the paddling community. But the humble athlete doesn't say much about his accolades. Even his hardware is stored away haphazardly in boxes. These days, he's not so much in the river as he is on the riverbanks, training the next top paddlers through his KwaZulu-Natal-based Change Your Life Academy.
My City Change Life Academy identifies sporting talent in the Valley of 1,000 Hills and gives that talent a support structure to be great.
Martin!
Hey Martin, how's it going?
Today marks the start of a very busy week for his team of 44 Zulu paddlers. They will be competing in multiple races leading up to one huge event.
We're here today for the Nana Dam to Durban. It's a seeding race for the doozy, and that means that they'll get hopefully on the front row, which is important at the start of the Doozy Canoe Marathon because there's over 1,000 people that paddle, and if you're stuck further back, you just got traffic to get through.
The Doozy Canoe Marathon is said to be the biggest canoe race in Africa and one of the world's most popular paddling events.
The race is steeped in history and integrally woven into the fabric of KwaZulu-Natal, and it is a South African sporting icon.
Founded in 1951, this prestigious river marathon is a 3-day, 120-kilometer race from Pietermaritzburg to Durban. Paddlers compete in singles or in groups up to 4. Martin is a 7-time champion and current record holder of the Doozy.
My life changed forever in that I stopped my professional sport and put all my energy into my Change Life Academy because just the person I am, I wanted it to be a success. I started identifying talent and then gave that talent a support structure to be good. And in that Doozy in 2009, all 10 came in the top 36.
Ever since, Martin's athletes have regularly placed in paddling events. Some have even gone on to become full-time professional athletes.
One of the very successful academy paddlers is Simon Mtolo, and he was in Change Life for 6 years and did incredibly well and got a top 5 in the last Doozy, so much so that the sponsor of the Doozy formed a racing team, and he's one of 3 who has become a professional paddler.
Being with Change Life was so grateful. They've been helping me a lot and giving me the best equipment. Now I'm preparing for Doozy. I'm hoping to win the gold at Doozy.
Martin's academy remains local to the Zulu community situated along the Valley of 1,000 Hills.
In order to make the academy sustainable, I don't take my athletes from different provinces and you've got transport issues and they're taken out of their home environment. My hub is around Nagle Dam, and there the guys walk to training. So it's probably like a 10-kilometer radius of this dam is where all this amazing talent comes from.
As the qualifier is coming to a close, Martin's eager to find out how they made out.
Hey, Jabulani. Yeah, how did it go?
We did go well, but...
well done.
But otherwise, good race today, yeah.
Good race.
Next, we meet one woman who's proving art can be a path toward healing.
What I like about my work is the freedom of it. The freedom that gives me to create whatever I feel like. Every time I create a work, I take small piece of me out, you know, like if it's a happiness, a sadness, or it goes into the work, you know, so I become lighter and lighter and lighter. I'm using my art to heal myself, to discover my worth, and to heal the universe. I am Lisette Chirim, visual artist from northern Mozambique, and I'm a change maker.
Lisette Chirim uses rich textiles, bold colors, and recycled materials to create mixed media masterpieces.
I began to collect all the items on the floor that I thought they would be useful. I picked up all the buttons, all the small metals.
Today, she's going to the market to source new materials.
The market is called Giua. I began to work with the Capulana because Capulana he brings lots of colors and there's a cultural value, nice material.
Lisette is known for her large fabric collages. She says her troubled past often influences her creations.
My work is the fruits of my childhood, you know, crying, beating, and missing my mom, and feeling lonely. It's reflected now in my work. It's like my work is the healing part of that, the pain I carried. This piece is, I call it the Book of Demand. When I went to meet my father embraced me, but suddenly he began to reject me because my stepmother, she rejected me. I said, okay, the human side of my family reject me, but the spiritual side, the spirits, my ancestors, they embrace me, they love me. So this is about my ancestral lineage. So our fathers and ancestors, they used to knit. So this is a continuation of, you know, the knitting, but now using the fabric. And to express my feelings about being rejected from the human side, but being loved and embraced and chosen by my ancestors. And it's my sketchbook.
Art came naturally to Lisette, but she says she didn't initially consider it as a career.
The first time I found out I was an artist was actually when I was working at aluminium company. I used to draw, you know, images and funny things. And my boss at the time, he said to me that he believed that I'm an artist and I should check that out. I looked at myself and then I saw that I was surrounded by artists. I'm like, you know what? My boss is actually right.
In 2005, the visual artist moved her family from Mozambique to Cape Town to pursue her creative passions.
When I was in Cape Town, I came with so much energy and I wanted to make everything.
While there, she started gaining recognition.
The Duval company is a beer company. They chose me out of all the artists in South Africa. They chose me to be the first black artist to collaborate with them to design a glass for them. And Yo-Yo Ma, you know, big cello player, he was doing a tour in Africa. And each country that he went, they would choose one artist to design a poster for him. So I was the chosen one in South Africa.
Despite her success, Lisette felt the need to return home.
I was able to have a decent life out of art. But then my soul began to die. I just felt like numb. But then I come to Tofu. Tofu is a place that I feel is recharging me back. Welcome to my home, my studio space, my sanctuary.
We were with Lisette as she prepared for an exhibition at the Morton Fine Arts Gallery in the US.
The theme I'm working on is like my soul's freedom, you know? I'm talking about the soul's freedom of being, you know, because when I was working in Cape Town, I felt that I was losing myself. So yeah, it's the spiritual encounter, my soul reviving in my body. I start first with the canvas. I draw into the canvas and then I follow the pattern with these stripes. And then after that goes to Celso. Celso is the one that is going to stitch every little piece into the canvas. And then we put the final piece on the end here so it can hang on the wall. Being a visual artist is the most fulfilling energy you can ever have. For me, that's it makes you feel like you own your own life. It drives you to do things, and you can create out of rubbish or things that people think is rubbish, and you put together and you become beautiful.
Thanks so much for watching. You can find past episodes and so much more at our website. We'll be back next week with some new and exciting change makers.